All right, good afternoon. Apologies if we're a bit earlier than usual. I know, it's to keep you guessing, right? Il y a des gens qui arrivent dans le couloir? Oui? Ok. On attend. If I was waiting for a full room, we'll be here till Christmas. Yeah. All right, good afternoon and happy Wednesday. In just a short while, we will be joined by General Michael Beary, the head of the UN mission to support the agreement in Hudaydah. He spoke to Security Council members yesterday in close consultations, but he will brief you here and on the record in just a few minutes. And tomorrow, my guest will be our Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Liu Jianmin. He will be joined by the permanent representative of Portugal to the UN, Ana Paula Zacarias, and the deputy permanent representative of Kenya to the UN, Ambassador Kinyungu. They will brief you on what to expect at the forthcoming UN Oceans Conference, which, as you all well know, will take place from June 27th to July 1st in Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. Speaking of Portugal, this morning the Secretary General spoke at the Security Council's open debate on women, peace, and security. He told Council members that gender equality offers a path to sustainable peace and conflict prevention, and yet we are moving in the opposite direction. Today's conflicts are amplifying gender inequality, poverty, climate disruptions, inequalities, he said. The Secretary General underscored that women's equality is a question of power and that today's political deadlocks are entrenched in conflicts are just the latest examples of how enduring power imbalances and patriarchy continues to fail us. He urged Council members to reflect on the fact that despite consistent agreement on the value of women at the peace table, there is still a huge gap in their participation and in the implementation of promises made for their protection, human rights, and dignity. The Secretary General also encouraged Council members to commit to increasing support to women's civil society, conflict prevention, and peace-building work. Yesterday afternoon, you may have seen we issued a readout on the Secretary General's phone call with Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre of Norway. The Secretary General conveyed his deep gratitude to the reinstatement of funding in support of UN organizations that was done by the government of Norway, and the Secretary General expressed the hopes that other countries would follow Norway's example. Just a quick note back on Yemen. Hans Grunberg, the special envoy for Yemen, briefed the Security Council yesterday afternoon. He said that the truce in Yemen has now been holding for 2.5 months, which is something that seemed unimaginable at the beginning of this year. He noted the truce continues to hold in military terms, and there's been a significant reduction in civilian casualties. The truce offers a rare opportunity to pivot towards peace that should not be lost, Mr. Grunberg said. Turning to Syria, we are very much saddened by the death today of a Syrian humanitarian worker, aid worker, who was killed by a car bomb on his way to work in Al-Bab in northern Aleppo. This tragedy is a stark reminder of the continuing hostilities in Syria, which are claiming the lives of civilians and aid workers. There have been 23 fatalities among humanitarian workers in the northwest of Syria since 2020. The Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the UN, Mark Cutts, condemned today's attack and called for a full investigation. Meanwhile, the UN cross-border operation from Turkey into Syria continues, reaching 2.4 million people every month in northwest Syria. Last month, more than 1,000 trucks crossed from the Bab al-Hawa crossing port carrying food, shelter, nutrition, and health supplies. Some 4.1 million men, women, and children need humanitarian aid in northwest Syria this year. That's up from 3.4 million last year. Most of those people are women and children. And moving to a couple of notes for you on South Sudan, where humanitarian colleagues are telling us that the needs are expected to increase as the country enters the rainy season, and access to those in need will become even more difficult. This is happening at a time when the humanitarian community is forced to make the difficult decision of cutting back aid due to funding shortages. We told you yesterday about how the World Food Programme will need to scale back on its food assistance and will now reach 4.5 million out of the 6.5 people who need aid and who've been initially targeted. Now the Food and Agriculture Organization has also to reduce plans for seed distribution to allow the agency to focus on people with extreme needs. Our humanitarian appeals for South Sudan seeks $1.7 billion, but it is only 26% funded. So we encourage donors to give and to give generously. But despite this aid shortfall, aid workers have managed to reach more than 3 million people so far this year. Flexible funding available earlier in the year is needed to prevent a dangerous deterioration of the food security situation. And from our peacekeeping partners in South Sudan, the mission tells us they've been providing training on the protection of children to 30 senior officers of the Sudan People's Liberation Army in opposition. Meanwhile, in Warrap State, the mission continues to conduct air patrols in the Marialu area. When intercommunal conflict spiraled in the area last year, the mission set up a temporary base and deployed peacekeepers to reduce tensions. The temporary base is now closed, but our colleagues say the sustained presence of blue helmets there, as well as concerted efforts by all partners, help stabilize the community, including through the reopening of schools and hospitals. Quick note from Ecuador, where following protests this week, the UN team there has been calling for peace, to lower tensions, and to seek a path of dialogue. In this regard, the UN country team urges unrestricted respect for the constitutional and legal guarantees for the exercise of social protest and the rules of due process applicable to all persons detained in accordance with international human rights standards. It also calls on all social actors to exercise their rights to protest in a peaceful manner within the framework of the rule of law and the necessary social coexistence for peace. Today is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and this year's theme is combating elder abuse. In a tweet, the Secretary General noted that elder abuse is a global issue that impacts the human rights, health, and well-beings of millions of people around the world. He called for greater respect for the rights and dignity of older people. According to the World Health Organization, every year 1 in 6 people age over 60 or older experiences some form of abuse. Like many forms of violence, abuse of older persons has increased during the pandemic. With rapid population aging in many countries, this growing trend is expected, unfortunately, to continue. Quick programming note, tomorrow at 9 a.m., the Department of Global Communications for the United Nations is organizing a virtual event entitled Fighting Hate Speech Global Perspectives. The event will mark the first International Day for Countering Hate Speech, and that is June 18th. And in the 7th episode of discussions entitled Beyond the Long Shadow, Engaging with Difficult Histories, the event will focus on strategies of countering hate speech on university campuses and beyond. The keynote speaker is Alice Ndiritu, the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and the panel will include scholars and researchers from universities in the Netherlands, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and the United States. You can find more information on the registration link and the websites of the Holocaust and UN Outreach Program or UN Academic Impact. Madame.
Thank you, Steph. A question on Ukraine. Today, the Turkish foreign minister said that safe corridors could be established without demining in the Black Sea for grain exports from Ukraine. And also, the Russian ambassador said that if those corridors are established, they would provide safe passages. Can the UN establish these safe corridors without demining?
Well, I can tell you on that, and that we have been in very close contact and are working close cooperation with the Turkish authorities on this issue. The Secretary General is extremely grateful for the cooperation we've had from President Erdogan, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, and the Turkish military, who've been working so constructively in order to solve this problem. I'm not going to go into any detail at this point, but I think the comments made by the foreign minister in Turkey were extremely positive.
Can the UN do it without demining it? Is it possible?
Again, I'm not going to go into any details, but I think the foreign minister referred to a UN plan, which is in fact the case. There are various options. Obviously, I think the role of the Turkish military will be critical in that regard.
And has the UN been in touch with the Ukrainians and asked them if they agree to do it?
We've been in touch with all the concerned parties. The Turkish authorities have also been extremely helpful in coordinating contacts in that regard.
One follow-up on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, are you seeking any assurances from the Russians that they will not use these demined ports on the Ukrainian side as a target, to exploit it as an opportunity to attack?
Again,
that's Ukraine's main concern.
I'm fully aware of that. I don't want to go, again, into any operational details as things are still being cemented into place. But in order for this to go forward, there will be a need for agreement from the Ukrainian side, from the Russian side. So, and this in close cooperation with the Turkish authorities, including the Turkish military. So, obviously, if and when we have an agreement, that will mean that, as in any of these types of negotiations, that the parties involved will have reached a place where they feel comfortable that this can move forward. Pam.
I have a question on the money that WFP cut from Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry,
South
the
Sudan?
WFP cut
From South Sudan?
from South Sudan. I'm sorry.
Right.
But I'm sorry, I'm on this last note. The follow-up to that is, do you see I understand you don't want to go into details, but do you see any progress on the talks, since obviously there's a deadline to export the grain?
So
And-
are we talking about South Sudan or
No,
Ukraine?
I'm sorry. Let's start again.
Okay, let's start. Let's rewind. Let's go.
Total rewind. All right. Number one, do you think there is a way to reverse the cutbacks from WFP to South Sudan? Number one. And number two, on the last question on the package deal to get the Black Sea ports demined, do you see progress? Thank you.
Okay. I think on the last question, as I told Betul, the statements by the foreign minister of Turkey were positive, and again, we will stick to our position of just confirming things as they happen. But it's clear to see that I think that was a very positive statement. On the WFP South Sudan question, it's cash, right? The price of food is going up for a number of reasons, including and very much front and foremost the war in Ukraine. We are in desperate need of cash for humanitarian appeals. I mean, the Ukraine appeal is, I think, 76% funded, which is amazing and wonderful. But if you look at humanitarian appeals just across sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, I think South Sudan, I said, is about 25% funded, which is frankly probably on the high end of appeals in the region. We need cash. And obviously, solving the issue of grain and fertilizer, we would hope will have a positive impact on lowering food prices. But we need cash now. And WFP and all our other humanitarian partners need that cash now.
And in the cutoff to 1.7 million people, South Sudan Are there other markets that you're looking at in terms of buying the grain?
It's not an issue of availability of grain. It's an issue of availability of cash.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there any reason that South Sudan has been impacted like even more than other humanitarian aid in other areas?
It's an issue of money. Other humanitarian emergencies have also been impacted.
So the South Sudan is underfunded compared
Yes,
to...
and basically many of them are underfunded. I think yesterday I also just flagged, again on WFP, they will have to cut back some of the humanitarian air service in Western Africa because of lack of funds. Edward, and then we'll go to James.
Hi, Steph. Today, the 18th round of Astana talk on Syrian issue has been held in North Sudan, in Astana. We know there's a delegation from UN there. What does the Secretary General expected, given the fact it's already the 18th round of the talk?
Well, listen, I mean, there have been many rounds of the Astana talks. There have been many rounds of Syria talks. Our determination to help the Syrians solve this problem through political means remains at 100%. And we are not flagging in our determination. The parties could come to an agreement at any time, but we can't force them to come to an agreement, so we will continue pushing them in the right direction.
I mean, how much expectation do you have? Does the
We've always been realistic optimists.
All right. Okay. The second question is also.
That's the third, but that's who's counting.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. So the next question is on the UK's asylum seeker, because yesterday it seems under a decree the UK has granted the flight from UK to Rwanda. What's the reaction from the?
Well, I mean, the fact that there was no flight is obviously good news. Our colleagues at UNHCR are continuing to follow this extremely closely. We've seen the statements made by the UK government. I think to quote yet again Filippo Grandi, everything about this policy is wrong. Mr. Bays.
Yeah, I'm late to the plan of getting the grain through the Black Sea, so I have some more questions on it.
You have not been on vacation, James. You've been covering this story from other places.
I've been stuck in a consulate all morning.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Anyway, just who is leading the negotiations on behalf of the UN? Is this a WFP lead? Is this Mr. Beasley, or is there someone who's actually involved?
I think the Secretary has been clear that there are two sides or two parts of this package. One being getting Russian grain and fertilizer out to market, and that's Rebecca Greenspan, who's leading on behalf of the UN on this effort, and on the getting Ukraine grain out to market, that's Martin Griffiths, who's been leading on that.
And in terms of the Ukraine bit in the Black Sea, there must be negotiations at the other end of where you then bring the grain to get it out, to global markets. I mean, where would be the route from Odessa to where?
Well, I mean, we're not.
If you're charting a route through mined territory and you're creating a safe passage, where is the spot that you then distribute into the global supply system?
We're not replacing the marketplace, right? So purchasers of grain, commercial purchasers, will be able to access that grain through the regular routes. We will not, the UN, as far as I know, will not be setting up a grain exchange or whatever. I mean, we're just basically, what the Secretary General's efforts are on how to get the grain out to market. There are barriers, which are security and political barriers. we're working with the parties to break those, but then the market will play
Yeah,
play
but
its role.
normally there'd be freedom of navigation and you go to numerous
Right, but I mean, I
ports.
think
and
once-
if it's mined and you're only going to have certain routes,
Right, but
or
I mean,
one route
they
or
will
two
get,
routes.
they will get, I mean, the way I see it is, I mean, they will get out of the Black Sea and then onto to wherever their destination is.
Okay.
Madam, oh, sorry, and then we'll go, let's just go, yeah, first, we'll keep it the first round.
Thank you. On Gaza, based on a report published by Save the Children organization, 800,000 children, that's 80% of Gaza children, suffer depression, sadness, and fear caused by 15 years of the Israeli blockade. The organization called on Israel to take immediate steps to lift the blockade. Any comments on this finding?
Well, I mean, this is something we've been working towards for a long time, which is working with the parties and trying to create an environment where the blockade can be lifted. And we have, UNICEF and others have expressed over and over again their deep concern at the conditions of children who grow up in an environment with very little perspective. And that sort of damage is not easily repairable. Monsieur.
Thank you, Stéphane. A couple of days ago, the World Bank said that most of the countries are headed for recession. Even here in the US, many economists are warning about that. Is the UN ready for this kind of disaster in case it's going to happen? Hopefully not, mainly to help poor countries. Thank you.
Well, this is obviously clouds that we see gathering on the horizon. The challenge is that if all these things come to fruition, it will demand even greater solidarity from those countries who have the means to help people who don't have the means. It also demands a greater flexibility on the financial markets to give greater fiscal space to developing countries so they can put in place the economic policies that they will need. Linda Fasula.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question regarding the Pope and the Ukrainian war. I'm not quite sure if this has been asked of you. But
I don't speak for His Holiness, but you may ask the question.
No. Anyway.
But try me.
I think you know, of course, that there was an article released in Jesuit magazine yesterday which quoted the Pope as saying that regarding the Ukrainian war, that perhaps somehow, he said, it had been provoked or not prevented. And it's believed that was in reference to NATO's expansion eastward. And I was wondering if, number one, the SG has had, much contact with the Pope in the last month, or if he's seen the statement, and if he has any comments.
No, he has not had any contact with the Pope in the last month or so. I don't know when the last contact was established. I mean, on a more general term, I think the global community could always do better in investing in preventing conflict, right? Because dealing with conflict once it has started is complicated, is expensive, and is painful for all the people, the civilians who are impacted, as we see in Ukraine and many other places. Betul, now go to Pam.
Thanks, Steph. One more follow-up on Ukraine. I might have missed it. I'm not sure if you have had anything to say on that. The Biden administration's proposal to build silos on the Polish border, does the UN think that it would
I have no comment on that.
help?
I have no comment on that.
No?
No.
Why not?
That's it's my prerogative, and sadly, I know it's frustrating to you, but I have no comment on it. It's clear what we've been working on, but I have no comment on that. Okay. Pam.
It was actually the same question. Petula and I are thinking alike. But if there were to be this, which the U.S. has announced, would the UN be able to then buy the grain that's exported to Poland? And is there any back and forth with the U.S. with the UN on this plan?
I have no comment on that plan. We are, of course, in touch with the U.S. authorities and have been for quite some time on the whole issue, whether it's the Russian grain and fertilizer and Ukrainian grain.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Steph. Is there any update regarding the UNSMIL head nomination, Libya?
No, sir. I would be the first one to hopefully be able to announce it, so I don't have to answer those questions anymore. Speaking of answering questions, I will ask General Beary to come. Oh, sorry, Benno, and then, but General, please take your seat.
Thank you. Just a question about the stopped flight from London to Rwanda with asylum seekers. Does the SG have any comment on this?
I mean, I was pretty expressive yesterday on this. First of all, we fully back the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who is by international law through the Refugee Convention, is the UN's voice on this. He has been very clear in saying that everything about this is wrong. The Secretary General fully backs him and shares that opinion. And I think it's important to add, we very much hope that this idea of offshoring of refugee processing, asylum processing, is not something that expands to other countries. Before I turn to a general, I was given a statement to read out on Burkina Faso to say that the Secretary General strongly condemns the appalling attack on the night of June 11th against the town of Sentenga in the Sahel region of Burkina Faso, which resulted in the deaths of scores of civilians and the displacement of large numbers of people from their homes. The Secretary General expresses his sincere condolences to the bereaved families, to the victims, as well as the people of Burkina Faso. The Secretary General calls on the authorities in the country to spare no efforts in identifying and bringing the perpetrators of this attack to justice. He reiterates the commitment of the UN to continue to support Burkina Faso in its efforts to end insecurity and foster social cohesion. As promised, our guest today is General Beary, who is the head of the UN mission to support the agreement in Hudaydah. General, you spoke to the Council in close consultations yesterday. Welcome to an open briefing. As a reminder, you're on the record. So you will have some opening remarks, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay. Thank you, Stéphane. Thank you for that kind introduction, and nice to be with you all today. I'll lead off with some opening remarks just to bring you into the atmosphere that I work in. And it's, as mentioned, I'm the head of the mission of the United Nations to support the Hudaydah Agreement. And that was formed to support the parties in Yemen to implement the government-wide ceasefire on Hudaydah agreed in Stockholm in December 2018. Before I update you on the current situation in Hudaydah this afternoon, I would like to stress the importance and strategic significance of Hudaydah to Yemen's future stability. The ports of Hudaydah serve as a lifeline for Yemen. They supply up to 70% of the country's population with humanitarian aid and essential food supplies. There is no viable substitute for Hudaydah's ports, both in terms of location and infrastructure, and the governorate remains an indispensable pathway to Yemen's social economic recovery. We are currently in a new military and political landscape in Hudaydah, following the unilateral withdrawal of the government of Yemen's joint forces from large parts of the governorate in November 2021, which led to a shift of the front lines to the southern districts of the governorate. Pockets of instability remain in these districts, and the mission has been working to expand its monitoring to gain increased access to such areas of instability. In parallel, the mission has been able to increase its patrols to the 3 ports of Hudaydah, Salif and Rasisa. This sees us conducting mobile monitoring activities across the areas of interest, with our personnel engaging with Yemeni counterparts at each site, while also working to visit any incident sites of note. This monitoring of the ports is to ensure that their civilian nature is maintained, facilitating the continued entry of commercial and humanitarian goods, which remains a core objective of the mission's work. Meanwhile, I have undertaken numerous consultations with the parties in Yemen and key regional actors in the past months to identify common priorities and to encourage the parties to negotiate on issues that are of importance to the interests of Hudaydah's population, including mine action. Landmines and explosive remnants of war remain one of the most significant threats to the protection of civilians in Hudaydah. So therefore, hardly a week goes by without a child, a woman or a young man losing their life or being seriously injured by mines and explosive remnants of war. UNMA, as part of its mandate, has established a mine action coordination mechanism that is working with relevant mine action authorities and stakeholders in Hudaydah to support mine action interventions to reduce those same civilian casualties. The mission is sparing no effort to mobilize support to respond to this tragic problem within our immediate environment. As the mission's mandate renewal approaches next month in July, the mission's overarching priority remains to ensure that its effective presence increases stability in Hudaydah, protects the ports, reduces suffering, and betters the life of the population it serves, who have suffered from instability, conflict, and displacement, as you all know, for far too long. Thank you for that. I'm very open to any questions. Stéphane, anybody
Great,
would
thank
like
you.
to address to me? Yep.
James Bays.
James Bays, Al
James,
Jazeera. As the top UN military person in not just Hudaydah, but in Yemen, as your mandate comes for renewal, and clearly it's good news at the moment that the situation in the country is getting a little bit better. Is there, in your view, any possibility that you could move from being a monitoring mission to a peacekeeping mission, and potentially the footprint could go beyond Hudaydah to other parts of Yemen? Your view as a military official on the ground.
Okay, well, James, thanks for the question. There are a few points I'd like to make about that. First of all, I'm retired military. I'm the head of the UNMA mission for sure, but I work in very close coordination with Hans Grunberg, who is the SG's special envoy in the area. The mission at the moment, if you like, in terms of its mandate, has experienced quite a number of shifts. And as you rightly point out, the most recent shift is a very positive one, in that we now have 2.5 months of truce. But before that, we had the big withdrawal from Hudaydah on the 12th of November 21. And then, of course, another big shift has been the Presidential Leadership Council formation. So those shifts we've had to adjust to. But for me, I mean, we are at a point when our mandate now is finding, because of the truce, we're able to breathe more. We're able to get out there. We're able to do a lot more, particularly on the areas I mentioned, like mine action, which we all know and we all feel is such a terrible curse on the population of Yemen, which is highly contaminated. For the future, where the mission goes is really in the hands of the Security Council and with the parties. I mean, if they decide that there is something that a different perspective on a UN mission in the area, it might be a new mission, or perhaps the situation can be worked out with the existing resources, UN resources that are there. So at the moment, the future is looking a little bit better, but I would say still very fragile. And I think I would share that with the Special Envoy, that it remains a very fragile environment. And we all, of course, wish the very best for the Yemeni population, that they can be lifted out of this curse of war for the past 7, almost 8 years.
Thank you. We'll stay with Al Jazeera, but
Thank you, Stephen. What are the obstructions that the UNMA still are facing, and from which side?
Okay. There's a number of points to that. I'll probably deal with it from both sides. We are located in a number of locations, but my main headquarters is in Hodeidah port itself. Therefore, we are very much with the local authorities, which is obviously Houthis. We have some restrictions on our freedom of movement. I have been pushing back against that and trying to get acquiescence from the Houthis to expand our patrolling format. I have been successful, and we now have, I would like to be patrolling to the ports unannounced, anytime, and visiting every area. And that's what I want to get to, but I'm not quite there yet. But we have increased the frequency of our patrols to ensure that the ports and the civilian nature of the ports is maintained, so that there's no question of them being interdicted and the humanitarian aid can continue to flow. And I must remind you, 70% is a huge figure. But we are also now expanding and have authority to patrol south, down to the new front line, down in the southern governorates, the southern districts of the Hodeidah governorate, where there is still a lot of instability. So that's on the Houthi side. I think there has been a relaxation to a degree, but still we are confined. On the government of Yemen side, we are building a good relationship now with the government of Yemen side. I've met with the Presidential Leadership Council Vice President Tariq Saleh and some of his team, the Tihama team. I'm very much hoping to have a very solid relationship with both sides, and then well-placed, if the special envoy's initiatives are successful, we will be well placed to take advantage and promote peace and be there for the parties. And as we all know, peace must inevitably come from the parties themselves. It can't be imposed upon them by the UN or by UN missions. It must come from them. But we will be there, ready to help them.
thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Accusations by the Yemeni government and coalition that Houthis using the ports to receive Iranian weapons. Were you able to conduct any kind of inspection on that?
It's outside my mandate, essentially. We don't, smuggling of weapons is not an area that is part of my mandate, but what I would add is this, is that if there was to be illegal importation of weapons into Yemen, you don't need to bring it through the port. There is a very, very long Red Sea coastline there, which is pretty much unsupervised. So there is no difficulty importing weapons if that's the case. But certainly in our patrol function, ensuring the civilian nature of the ports for the period we've been doing it since Stockholm, we haven't seen any increase in military manifestations or witnessed any of the activity that you are referring to.
Thank you. Linda Fasulo?
Thank you, Steph. I had another question that deals with Iran. I mean, I believe you said that there's been contact with Saudi Arabia, which is supporting the government. I was just wondering, have you had any or much contact with Iran, given its support of the Houthis?
Yeah, it's a very good point and a very good question. But my remit is very much Hodeidah governance and the ports and ensuring the ceasefire is maintained in those areas. The broader, if you like, panoply of the peace process is really in the hands of the special envoys, the special envoy Hans Grunberg. So he would deal with those parties, the broader parties. I myself do a lot of engagements, not particularly with Iran, but certainly with the parties who are more involved with the conflict, such as the Saudi-led coalition. I've been to the UAE. I work with the government of Yemen and with the Houthis. And I believe we have now quite a mature liaison system established with the Houthis. And we're building that also with the government of Yemen. And again, we want to be there, ready to take advantage of anything that comes out of this process at the moment. But we would all be mindful of the fact that it is still fragile, and we all wish the Special Envoy the very best in his huge efforts to bring peace to Yemen.
Pam?
Thank you very much, Major General. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. My question is, you talk about the fragility. What's your biggest concern about the deal going forward, about moving forward? Thank you.
Well, again, it's a very good point. I think it's well known that the biggest issue at the moment is relieving ties and freeing up the road structure in ties, which has been impacted for so many years. But there is other good developments and good peace dividends that are coming out of it. We ourselves work on local peace dividends to produce, but on the broader issues, we've seen the flights, which is really good news. So a lot of medical relief for people who badly need it, able to fly to Amman and now perhaps Cairo. So both of that is pretty good. I think at this point there has been approximately 20 fuel ships have come in, and I've seen what it looks like without the fuel ships, which is incredibly long lines of vehicles waiting to try and get a few litres of fuel. So these are all positive indicators, and we hope that all parties will engage fully with those indicators of peace, those peace dividends, and see the benefits of continuing on that path and bringing that relief to their population. So that's what we're all working towards. I'm sure you can closely identify with that.
Thank you. Abdullah?
Major General, thank you very much for this briefing. Abdullah Imasi from Television Al Arabi. Major General, have you noticed any perturbation in wheat and grain import in Yemen, in Hudaydah port? Especially we have heard yesterday during the briefing that Yemen was among countries which affected by Russian war in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it is slightly outside my brief, in quite a bit outside my brief, but I would say that we are still seeing vessels docking frequently in Hudaydah and Asalaf, which are the two main ports. Ras Isa is a smaller port that's not really used for the importation. So it's encouraging that these WFP vessels and of course fuel vessels are all docking because they're bringing a lot of relief. We hope that there won't be a big knock-on effect, because certainly Yemen, as we know, has something in the order of 150, 160,000 people who are very, very close to famine. So apart from a major part of the population who needs some type of humanitarian aid. So for my mission, it's also important to help the humanitarian community to have that penetration that they need into parts of the country where there is still, parts of the governorate of Hudaydah, where there is still a lot of instability. So we help the humanitarians. We do road reconnaissance. We try to ensure that there is no mine threats, etc. And we hope that they will not be affected, because we all know that Yemen was suffering very badly before the conflict started in Europe. And I think that's the best I can answer for you.
Okay, we'll take two more questions, Ephraim, and then we'll come back.
Yes. Thank you very much. I just a little follow-up on your answer concerning maintaining the part of your job that has to do with maintaining the civilian nature of the port. What difficulties are you facing on that specific front? And can we say today that all the accusations that the Houthis are still using the port for warfare are unfounded, according to you, or what's the situation on that level?
Okay. I think, first of all, I'd preface my remarks by saying that I lead a small political mission. It's approximately 120 strong. It's not a big peacekeeping mission. We have a small number of military monitors, and we do have challenges in terms of freedom of movement in Hudaydah. We work through those challenges as best we can. We patrol as regularly as we can into the port environment. And there is quite a separation between these ports. If you go from Hudaydah to Asalaf, it's a 3-hour round trip. So they're not all nicely tied together. So we go out there and we look for any changes in the immediate nature of the ports. And I can, from the periods that we've been doing this, and we've been doing it since Stockholm was agreed, we haven't seen any major military movements or military manifestations. And I think it's important for the international community that we continue to do this. And I certainly will keep advocating to get greater freedom of movement, in order to allow us to be out there more frequently and unannounced. And therefore we can reliably inform the international community that the ports are civilian in nature, because it's very clear that the ports are so important. They are strategically, there's no easy substitute for them on the coast. You go into the mountains, the ports are incredibly important for the delivery of humanitarian aid. We must keep them open, and that's part of my brief.
Thank you. Last question will go to Morad, and then Paulina for the President General Assembly will brief.
Thank you, General Beary. You mentioned at the beginning of this briefing the demining activities. What kind of support UNMAHA provide to these activities, if there is any?
Okay, you're getting into an area now I know quite a lot about, being ex-military. Mines, I know mines. The mine issue is huge. It's politically very sensitive. There's been something like 150 casualties since the 12th of November withdrawal, and that's all women and children, mostly young men on motorcycles. It's a very, very difficult environment in a very contaminated region. So the original mandate for our mission has a line that we should oversee mine action operations. UNDP are the legacy deminers or mine action organization in the country traditionally. So we're working now with UNDP. We're also working with the other stakeholders. YAMAC is split north and south between the two factions. So we're working with them. I have en masse technical experts. What we would like to do is get to a situation where we can get NGOs involved, because the NGOs have the ability to really make a difference. What we're doing is a lot of mine surveys, establishing where the really dangerous areas are for women and children in the likes of clinics, hospitals, schools. We're working with UNICEF, who are the mine educators for children, and very often children educate their parents, to try and ensure that the safety of the population is increased. But it is a huge challenge. It is a major challenge, and it's going to be there for many decades. And we all hope that we can progress this. But the main issue for us at the moment is to try and find a way for the Houthis to agree to allow NGOs to work in the country, bringing their equipment and bringing their experience, bringing their professionalism, and starting to demine properly.
Great. General, thank you very much for your time. We're grateful for that. And I'll ask Paulina to come up to brief on behalf of the President General Assembly. Thank you.
Okay.